Welcome everyone to the semi-finals of this year's QUDL. In participating in this debate, in opening government, we've got Texas AMU-RR. In opening opposition, we've got Cornell OA. In closing government, we've got CMU-BZ. And in closing opposition, Cornell AK. The motion before the House is that this House would revive NATO's plans to build a missile defense system in Eastern Europe. And I'd like to call on the Prime Minister from Texas to open the debate. Well, from Texas AMU.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin with a story. Not fiction, but fact. Political dissent in the Eastern European country of Ukraine. The president overthrown by a popular uprising. But someone in a seat of power 200 miles away in the city of Moscow decides that this is not according to their national policy agenda and decides further to intervene by sending in unmarked troops into Ukraine to seize control of the Crimean Peninsula, which the Russians purportedly had a claim to. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an example of exploitation. This is an example of countries exceeding their mandate with regards to the international policy agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to define the topic first to actually lay a groundwork for this debate. This House will revive, and I would like to focus on the word revive, NATO's plans to build missile defense systems in Eastern Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, no thank you, I'm just getting started. Ladies and gentlemen, our first line of argument today is the principal argument. And that is, but before I go on to that, I would like to state what the policy, in our opinion, is. We believe that this revival of the missile defense systems is in accordance and will be in accordance with the consent of the Eastern European countries, and specifically and exclusively for defensive purposes to prevent further incidents such as the Ukraine crisis and the Crimean crisis from occurring in the future. And it will preferably be installed in NATO countries wherein these missile defense systems have been installed in the past, dismantled, and then now are to be reinstalled. Case in point, Turkey. Not strictly speaking Eastern Europe, but in close proximity. Our first line of argument today is that this is basically a revival. The very inclusion of the word revival in the definition means that it shows the need of the moment. It addresses the status quo, and it is used primarily for deterrence. The sub-arguments in order to back this claim are as follows. Russia's recent involvement in Ukraine, as I stated as the factual story at the beginning of my speech, is a classic example, may I add, of unilateral action. NATO, on the other hand, is a multilateral international organization with the consent of no less than 25 countries from the Western Bloc as well as certain Eastern European countries. What this gives, if we are to compare the mandate of the two powers, this gives NATO a stronger mandate than a unilaterally acting country in the form of Russia. No, thank you, sir. And what this further assures us is that if a group such as NATO were to take such an action with the consent of a certain group or bloc of countries, it would have a greater effect in deterring Russia's expansionist policies than if an international organization such as the UN were to step in. Because the UN has further alliances, further blocs, further dissensions. The UN Security Council, which by the way includes Russia and its key ally China, can never ever agree on sending troops, when to send troops in crisis zones, or how to avoid crisis all over the world. Yes, I'll take you right now.
How do you prevent the misuse of these weapons by
I will be
smaller
getting to that.
countries when
Thank
they
you for
don't use them
bringing my
without
attention
just
to that.
cause?
I shall be getting to that. And the deterrence is also further important because of the sub-argument that the psychological effect of the Western Bloc not to intervene in Russia's expansionist policies will have such great repercussions on the Eastern European populations that if no action is taken, then it will be taken as a sign of weakness, and it will hark back to the days of the Soviet Union, when Russia, as a police state, as a czarist state, used to control virtually all of the mindsets of the Eastern European populations who strived and struggled for an end to communism and a communist mindset. Moving on to the second line of argument today is that this is also a need of the moment, not because of Russia's current actions, but because all other means and policy measures have been tried, exhausted, and have failed. They have yielded no results. Now, what are these other policy measures? These are economic means. They have proved to be completely ineffective. Why is that? Russia is a self-sustaining power. It has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. Economic sanctions are useless. It is one of the world's premier trading partners with the rest of the countries. It has a key ally in China with which it can trade. It has really good relations with the Japanese and the Asian tigers and such powerful economies. So economic sanctions cannot be applied to Russia's unilateral approach and policies because they are ineffective. If, let's say, Iran were to carry out such aggressionist policies, then economic sanctions would have an effect, but in the case of Russia, they are ineffective. Secondly, diplomacy has also been tried and has failed. We have had countless G20 summits, economic forums, and conferences on an international level where President Barack Obama, as a representative of the Western Bloc, where other presidents and representatives from the United Kingdom and Western powers have tried to persuade Russia to deter it from its expansionist policies, to deter it from interfering in other European countries, which is uncalled for because, as I said earlier, it has a psychological effect as an expansionist state. So, the diplomacy has failed, economic policy measures are ineffective, sanctions cannot work. So what needs to be exercised is therefore soft power, and this is also necessary because the balance of power has been severely tilted in Russia's favor. Ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you that Russia, when it was part of the Soviet Union, had nuclear arsenals in different countries. These included Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and other countries, including Ukraine. If the Western countries do not act on behalf of these European countries, dissent will ripen, and as a result, these countries, such as Ukraine and Poland, will be forced to commit their limited resources, but threatening resources, such as these defunct and almost defunct nuclear arsenals from the Cold War, which may have great severe repercussions for the world. Ladies and gentlemen, a subtle sub-argument under this premise of all other policy measures having failed is that Russia has a key role to play as a superpower in different regions of the world. There has to be some sort of implicit message that needs to be sent to Russia in order to tell them that the rest of the world is not sleeping, that if the United Nations may fail to act, the other countries will not sit back and tolerate Russia's aggressionist policies. If this defensive missile system is not established, then Russia may choose to overthrow and counterbalance the balance of power in conflict zones where it is a key stakeholder, such as Syria and the Arab Spring. And on that basis, I would like you to vote team proposition.
Thank you for that, and I'd like to invite the leader of opposition from CMU to respond. Cornell. Sorry. I'll never get your name right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. I want to bring up to the table the fact that because everyone was expecting a topic about Russia doesn't mean that we have to force it in the debate somehow. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let us think about what they proposed to us today. They told us basic things, right? They told us Russia is interfering in Ukraine, and diplomacy doesn't work, and economic doesn't work, so let's build a missile defense system. Does that make any sense to you, ladies and gentlemen? It doesn't make any sense to us on side opposition. We don't see that how the building of missile defense will solve the problem, and they didn't tell us why it's the only solution, why it's the best solution, how is it a solution anyway? Okay, let's before I go to my points, let me refute some of the points that was put forward by the opening government. First of all, they tried to make it look nicer by saying, okay, we'll take the consent of these countries in Eastern Europe. But we ask you, Whose consent are you taking? Is it the consent of the people or the consent of the government? Because if we look at what happens in Ukraine, in Crimea, for example, we see that what the governments think is not what the people think, and we saw that by the popular vote when people voted that they want to be part of Russia, right? So if you take the consent of the government, we don't necessarily care about the consent of the government or what the government thinks, right? And then they also, yeah, as I mentioned, they didn't link their example quite well to the topic we're discussing now. And then they said also and then I wanna bring I wanna bring up the fact that Russia already took over Crimea, right? Without using any missiles, they sent troops in. So the system that he proposing to put on reality right now is not gonna wouldn't prevent what happened already in Crimea. No, thank you. It's not gonna wouldn't prevent what already happened in Crimea because it doesn't prevent troops from going into countries. Is that true? Please go ahead.
Are you proposing that instead of having a defense measure system, we just station troops instead?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that what he's trying to propose. Ladies and gentlemen, what's the problem they propose to us? It's only Russia, right? Russia trying to interfere in Ukraine. And then they proposed a solution that we have to build a missile defense. I am proposing to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the solution that they are proposing has nothing to do with the problem they presented to us, and it's not solving the problem. Is it a good idea or not? I will go to that in my own substantial points, but what I'm telling you is not gonna solve what they are trying to claim is gonna solve. Is that clear? Okay, okay, let me go to my main points. The first point is it will cause economic crisis. It's going to put economical pressure on the European countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that Europe has a financial crisis right now, and Europe is falling apart. If you are trying to convince Europe to build a missile defense system that will cost billions and billions of dollars, it's going to cause more pressure and more stress financially on these countries and the Europe system. No, and then they will tell us, yeah, maybe it's necessary to protect those countries, but we propose to you as well, it's not necessary. And the status quo now, we don't see that without the missiles how the Europe countries are suffering, and with the missiles how the Europe countries will suffer less. Because, ladies and gentlemen, in the current situation right now, we don't see the huge demand that they are trying to draw now. I'll take you in a minute. The huge demand that they are trying to convince us that it exists. It doesn't exist. Because how many missiles have been used in the modern time have been used to attack Europe, and how?
The point is the daring, sir.
No, thank you. And then, yeah, that's the first point. The second point is also the misuse of these missiles. We think that will be abused. These missiles, nobody will take responsibility for these missiles, right? If these missiles were misused, if these missiles were out of control, if people were dead by these missiles, who is gonna take responsibility for the abuse of these missiles? I'll take it.
Don't you think NATO will take responsibility of that?
The NATO will take responsibility. How the NATO will take responsibility for this misuse? I would love to hear more about it from this speech, because I don't think they will. They never did. They never will. And then because that we are eliminating the human factor from our war in these days. Because I put it to you, all countries now, including Europe countries, any countries, have systems that can detect planes going in, missiles, radars. They have radars, right? But the only thing they are proposing now is to make it automated. They are eliminating the human factor, and by eliminating the human factor, we think people take less responsibility. People, they don't think about, like, people can think about what they do, and they can make rational decisions before attacking other, other targets or whatever. They can have responsibility. They can make rational decisions. But when you have automated system that just attacks any foreign bodies they detect, then who is gonna take responsibility for that? We know what happened, for example, from Syria. One plane was detected by the Turkish radars from Syria, right? And then it was attacked, but it was one plane that went into the Turkish borders by mistake. If you have automated system that just kills everyone that passes the border, we think that's gonna eliminate the human factor, eliminate the rational decision, and destroy everything without thinking, even if it's by mistake. It's gonna destroy. Okay, so what have we brought to the table today, ladies and gentlemen? We told you that the solution they are proposing has nothing to do with the problem. It's not gonna solve the problem, and it's not linked to the problem whatsoever. We told you that if we implement such a policy, and if we let such a motion pass, we will have more economic crisis in Europe. We'll have abuse of these missile defense systems. We will have less control of it. We will have less people take responsibility, and we'll take out the human factor that's many important in making rational decisions. For all these reasons, we are proud to oppose.
Okay, I would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister from Texas AMU to respond.
In India, there was a mechanism to stop the troops of Russia entering. There wasn't a proper defense mechanism to stop the Russian troops to enter. That is why they sent the troops. So according to the argument, they just said that we don't send missiles. So if they can send troops because of the absence of the defense mechanism to stop their troops, they can send missiles later on because there isn't a defense mechanism for missiles. What guarantees it? Ladies and gentlemen, that is what we based our argument on. We do not say that this solves the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, to solve the problem, we need different solutions. But this is a step towards the solution. Ladies and gentlemen, what happens in conflict resolution is that you try to talk out with countries. You try to take necessary measures like economic sanctions. When they don't work, then you have to move towards self-defense mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, that comes, and that is the inactive use of power. Ladies and gentlemen, what they're failing to understand is that this is not. Please let me make a point. This is not an active use of power, ladies and gentlemen. This is just a step. This is just the next step in the current scenario. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the previous steps have failed. You have seen what mockery of economic sanctions the Russian leaders have made and what their ambitions are, and they have clearly shown it in the sense of their occupation of Crimea. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is warranted that these defense mechanisms, missile defense mechanisms, should be in place because, ladies and gentlemen, if they can send troops into country and they can pass a treaty of occupation in their parliament, then they can easily send defense. They can easily send missiles, and they have done it previously in 1960 when you had Cuban missile crisis. And ladies and gentlemen, in that also, what solved was that inactive use of power by President Kennedy solved the problem, because otherwise it was leading towards a war. And inactive use of power, a show of power, a show of resolve, solved the problem, and not economic sanction are there. Because, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes you have to use inactive use of power. Ladies and gentlemen, what is happening is that the balance of power is shifting towards Russia, and we need to restore that balance of power, because this bloc also, the NATO, by its charter, by its treaties, has the right to defend the countries of its the member of NATO. They have to come to support those countries, and those countries are a part of NATO, and by their charter they have to guarantee the protection of those countries. Yes, sir.
It's a step, but it's a useless step. So what we are asking you now, if you took that step a few months before the Ukrainian problem, how would it make any difference since missiles weren't used and troops were sent in?
So we sit back and wait for Russia to throw the missiles in Crimea or Ukraine, and then we then we put in the defense mechanism system, because we just have to wait for the other party to take action, since they have showed their audacity to take such actions in the current scenario in 21st century. Then when they are moving back towards colonialism and taking the colonies that they gave away, when they can do this, then they can also send missiles, and that is why we need a defensive mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reiterated that this is not an aggressive mechanism, this is a defensive mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, when they ask these countries still have some form of military might. They have these Eastern European countries. They have missiles. Even the NATO countries have missiles, but they haven't used it because they are not that fool enough to use that and bring the country to bring the world to war. Because ladies and gentlemen, and their steps of diplomacy and their steps of diplomacy ensure that they are ready to resolve this peacefully and not by aggression. And aggression will be only used as a last resort, and it is warranted because once a country's sovereignty is breached, then it has all the right by UN charters and by every other human law to use aggressive mechanism. But still, we are not going towards the aggressive mechanism. So now, ladies and gentlemen, also they said that how will you ensure that the countries concerned with ladies and gentlemen, most of them are democratic form of governments, and they have democratic leaders, and if they don't agree for this, then the defense mechanism will not be installed. It will only be installed in the countries that agree to it, and it's not like that every country will refuse it, or every country will accept it. There will be problems, but only consent and only on the proposals of that country, this defense mechanism will be installed, and it is important. Yes, sir. Yes.
I have a question, sir. If there is a pro-Russian leader in power, then what guarantee do you have that he would not use the same weapons against all people?
It will not be installed in that. It will not be installed in that country because it has to be installed in preferably the NATO countries, and NATO countries that are still part of the NATO are not the countries that have pro-Russian leaders in the country. So you have to get your facts straight. So now, ladies and gentlemen, also what I need to remind you is that also Russia is a nuclear power. Ladies and gentlemen, we have this threat of nuclear power, and we need a defense mechanism because nuclear power can be used through missiles, and we need to stop those. We need to stop that. We need to cater to that possibility that this nuclear aggression can be used, and for that we need defense mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, they said that the Eastern European countries are going through financial crisis. Once they are attacked, and once they are attacked and they're ravaged by the Russian aggression, then what will happen? Financial crisis. They will just they will just simply yield into the Russian aggression. And ladies and gentlemen, what you should look at the strategic position of the Eastern European countries. If Russia by any means gets to capture one or two countries, ladies and gentlemen, then it will put the Western powers and Eastern and Russia neck to neck, and it will further lead to possibility of war. Ladies and gentlemen, also my line of argument was the self-defense of the country's right to self-defense. Every country has a right to self-defense, and in time, and when it feels that its national sovereignty is in danger, it has the right to self-defense. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are saying, why NATO is building a self mechanism, is that these Eastern European countries are not financially stable, and the NATO will provide the aid, and the NATO countries will provide the mechanism and missiles that will be installed, but they will be used by the consent of the countries only, and by the multilateral action, and not by a single country like Russia has done. Ladies and gentlemen, that means that these system will be secure, and also the country's right to self-defense and its people confidence in the country will be restored, because they won't feel threatened each night they go to sleep, because they will know that something is there to defend them. And ladies and gentlemen, on these points, I think that you should vote in favor of the proposition. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call on Omar as the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to conclude the first half of the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, what the side proposition here are telling us is that in this era, we don't want diplomacy, we don't want multilateral action, we don't want bilateral action, we want unilateral action. We want to work by whoever is more powerful. Raise money, use it for funds, use it for military. Sir, we are in the post-Cold War era. I know you said this is multilateral action, but let me define what multilateral action is. When we say bilateral, we mean by the two sides of the argument, which means, for example, when Turkey installed the defense system against Syria, it means talking between Turkey and Syria, not between the NATO. The NATO is one side in this argument, and Syria is the other side. So when you say multilateral, I think you're misunderstanding it. This is unilateral action of installing these missiles in Turkey. So what the side proposition here are telling us is that we need deterrence. We use these missiles for deterrence, and this is the balance of power. Sir, this might be relevant to the Cold War era, but now we are in the post-Cold War era. We are in the 21st century, sir. We need to talk about disarmament, not armament. We need to talk about diplomacy, not proxy wars. We don't want proxy wars. We don't want more armament. We want countries to have diplomacy through political talks, through economic sanctions. You tell us that economic sanctions don't work. Well, economic sanctions are what brought Iran onto board with the nuclear armament. I know that you said that Russia. So Russia, you're telling us Russia is immune from economic sanctions, right? Well, we believe that is ridiculous because any country will be affected by economic sanctions, including Russia, including the United States. And the economic sanctions have actually dictated relationships between countries around the world in this era. Not armament, not who's more powerful, because the countries are looking for disarmament now, for diplomatic relationships. No, thank you. So you tell us that the decision to put these four missile systems in countries is by the will of the people and by the democratic governments. Well, let me tell you this: when the missiles were installed in Turkey, the Turkish people protested and they didn't want those. You know why? Because there were external forces, U.S. forces, coming in to install these missiles and to operate them. And the Turkish people did not want that, but the government did not ask for their opinion on that. The government did not ask for their opinion on that. They decided they want to do it, and they did it without seeking the people's opinion. So don't tell me it's democratic, because when these missiles are installed, the people oppose them to have foreign forces in their countries. Yes.
Are you proposing that if the country's people actually agree to having these missiles, then you would agree with that?
No, I'm just saying that the people also do not agree to it. I'm not saying this is the one factor, but there are many factors, which brings me on to my first point. That this will actually sever the ties between the neighboring countries and prevent them from having diplomatic relationships. So it will discourage bilateral talks. If I can arm myself and protect myself without talking to the other country, why would I have to talk to the other country? How would we have diplomatic relations? We saw this in Turkey. So before Turkey installed the missile system, there were many official conferences between top officials of Syria and Turkey. But once Turkey installed the missiles, guess what happened? They stopped having any relations, and look at what happened. This had a negative effect on the Syrian war, and Turkey has not been involved as much because they don't care what happens in Syria anymore. Yes, sir, go ahead.
How would bilateral talks work out between Ukraine and nuclear power Russia?
Thank you, sir. First of all, we said Ukraine does not apply to this example because the missile defense system, which I'm sorry, but you must understand, missile defense system defends a country from incoming missiles, okay, and planes, but not against troops. They can't stop troops, okay. And furthermore, what you're encouraging is power, is whoever has more power can rule, which is why Russia was able to get into Crimea. But if we were talking about diplomatic relations and supporting disarmament, then Turkey and then Ukraine and Russia would have had bilateral talks, and maybe the outcome was different. What we want in this era is disarmament, not armament. We want diplomatic relations, not proxy wars. So finally, to summarize, the first point is we want installing these missiles will sever the ties between the nations and will encourage unilateral action. By unilateral, I mean the countries on one side against the countries on the other side. So don't tell me all the NATO is multilateral. Okay. So the next point is we believe that this actually had a negative effect on the army's readiness. So if I have an automatic military missile defense system in my country, I won't worry about, for example, strengthening my forces and make sure my forces are ready, because I know the missile system will take out any missiles that come by itself. So we saw this actually in Turkey again, because once Turkey installed the missile system, guess what happened? They had terrorist attacks inside Turkey because they had less focus on border control and other army security measures. They relied on the system and their army readiness went down. So that is what we fear. We fear that by installing these systems, the countries will have reliance on them and will be less ready as an army towards other attacks from other places. Yes, sir, go ahead.
On the confidence of people say that the army's morale is shattered down because they think that they are unsafe if the missile comes down and they hit their camps and they could blow the whole camp.
Thank you, sir. Do you know actually that the missiles, when they hit plane or a missile that's coming, it can actually harm people in that region because parts of the missile can fall on the people in that area and injure them. Okay, on to my third point, which is this removes the human factor from defense systems. Today, unfortunately, we can by a press of a button kill a whole group of people, kill a town, kill a house, damage a house, and kill many people just with the press of a button. What this side is proposing is that we don't even have to press a button. The system will automatically shoot down missiles, shoot down planes, sometimes by mistake, without anyone have to press a button. So that's what we're going for. In essence, what they're telling us is that we should put our defense systems in the hands of robots. So imagine that. The robot will automatically shoot down the plane. The robot will automatically shoot down the missiles, and we won't have to be involved. We don't even need to press a button. So what's next? We're going to have our whole defense system based on robots, and then who will take responsibility? Yes, my partner alluded to this. Who will take responsibility? The NATO as a whole group. You can't hold someone responsible for someone dying. While if you have Turkey, for example, taking accountability for its forces, with its missiles, it will take accountability if it shoots a plane by mistake. But if the system malfunctions and shoots down a plane by mistake, Turkey will say it's not our fault. The NATO will say it's not our fault. Maybe it's the person who designed the system. It's their fault, and the responsibility will be diluted, and no one will pay for these lives that were taken. So again, we maintain that the forces must remain in human factor and not put in the hands of robots. So let me summarize my 3 points here. First of all, we said that this will discourage bilateral talks and diplomatic relationships through economic sanctions and political sanctions. So we discourage it. The second point is that it will decrease army readiness because armies will rely on these systems and will have less readiness in other areas. And finally, it will remove the human factor, which is essential in any conflict. So for all these reasons, we strongly oppose this motion. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I'd like to invite CMU's member of government to offer the extension.
Mr. Speaker, today I will bring 2 main points to the table, but before that, let me reverse some of the things mentioned by the opposition, right? First of all, they keep talking about diplomacy and responsibility. I'll answer both these points and my points in my substantive, right? But before that, let me clear up a few things. They seem to believe that these missile systems we are about to install will be work automatic. No one has said that, and this is not true. Secondly, they seem to believe that once NATO establishes these missile systems in Eastern Europe, these countries, the Eastern European countries, will stop defending themselves. However, that is not true, right? Let me give you an example of Qatar. So currently Qatar has the largest American military base outside of the United States, right? But does that mean that once the military base was established, Qatar stopped making its own army? No, right? It actually adopted an institution because the country realizes, every rational country realizes that just because an external organization is putting a base in your country doesn't mean that it's going to defend you, right? It's going to work for the benefits of NATO, of that organization, and not the country. Secondly, they seem to believe that economic sanctions are the only thing that work, right? However, I'd like to point out that it's not economic sanctions that work, it's a hybrid of solutions, right? Only by providing economic sanctions you cannot solve a problem, and the example that we have is Iran, right? Where the US has been giving them economic sanctions for the last 5 years. Economic sanction upon sanction, but has that stopped Iran from arming its nuclear arsenal? No, it has not. And now, let me move on to my substantive.
Sir,
first of all, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you. First of all, solutions like these, where the solution that the government is proposing is actually going to enhance the sovereignty of these countries. It's not going to infringe the sovereignty, it's going to enhance it. And let me tell you how. No, thanks. Let me tell you how. It's going to enhance the sovereignty by the inactive use of power, as mentioned by the opening government. Let me extend upon that. How does the inactive use of power help countries in diplomacy, right? Because we believe that diplomacy by itself will not work. However, once we use an active use of power, diplomacy will start working. Now, let me give you an example. Look at Pakistan and India, right? They separated from each other in 1947, and in the first 40 years of independence, these two countries fought 3 wars, Mr. Speaker. However, once India started developing its nuclear arsenal, and seeing that Pakistan started developing its nuclear arsenal, and once both these countries were nuclear powers, when they were on equal grounds, they stopped fighting, right? Because they knew that now the risks are much higher. Now that both countries stand on equal ground, the risks are much higher, and therefore they used inactive force. But these actually made peaceful and stabilized relationships between these countries. So what I'm saying here, Mr. Speaker, is that by using the inactive use of power, we actually stabilize long-term relations. Because once the government announces that motion, there will be a lot of people protesting, right? Because they'll say, we don't want violence, we don't want war, we don't want this, and neither do we, Mr. Speaker. But we believe that this is a good solution on the long term, because once this defense missile system has been established, it will provide long-term stability to the region.
Sir?
Now let me move on to my second point, Mr. Speaker. Why are we, at this moment in time, advocating this motion? The reason, Mr. Speaker, is because we want a balance of power in this region. Let's step back for a moment and look at this region, right? Opening government has already mentioned Russia. So Eastern Europe, this is one of the most volatile regions in the world. Why? Because on the east, we have three big powers: Russia, China, and Iran. And all three of these countries are very big powers, and they have shown time and again that they do not represent NATO's best interests, right? If you had to pick enemies for the NATO, then these would be the countries. Now the smaller NATO allies, which would be mostly European countries and Israel and such, these stand at a disadvantage. Why? Because the powers that I mentioned are very close in physical proximity to these countries, and therefore these small countries like Israel and Iran, for example, they cannot counter each other, because if you take Israel by itself, then it's no match for Iran. And Iran is already sitting there with its missiles pointed towards Israel, right? And this is why we want a NATO defense missile system in Eastern Europe, because then both countries would be on equal ground, right? We're not saying that we're coming to fight you. What we're saying is that we want diplomacy, but we want it on equal grounds. Because a big and powerful country, possibly nuclear armed, versus a small country, they cannot, this is not diplomacy, Mr. Speaker. This is threats and acquisition on one side and threats on the other. But once they're negotiating with equal grounds on both sides, that's diplomacy.
Yes,
and that is exactly what we want. We want equal grounds on both sides of the table, which is why we want defense systems in Eastern Europe. I take you.
So you think that creating a situation of mutually assured destruction is diplomacy?
No. Mutually assured destruction. There is nothing about this motion that says mutually assured destruction. What we are saying, this is actually assured political and military stability. Because once again, I've already shown you how once both these regions or both these powers, both these blocks are on equal ground, it will
On that point, sir,
guarantee long-term stability. I take you.
you gave us an example of Pakistan and India, and you keep telling us about balance between the two places, but you're installing the defense system on one side and not on the other side. How is that balance?
So, as I've already spoken about the balance of power, right? North America and other such powers. You mentioned the Russian example, so let me answer your point using the Russian example, right? Once Crimea was under attack, right, it was very clear which country was on which side, right? Russia was on one side, and then the US supporting Crimea. However, Russia could step over the border and bring their troops over to the Crimea, right? But the US, they have to cross the Atlantic Ocean in order to help their ally. And we've seen time and over again that countries in this region, countries in the region of Eastern Europe, cannot be trusted to maintain NATO's interests. And the example that we saw was Turkey's behavior, right? Russia said we want a military ship in that region, and Turkey is like, okay, you can cross the Bosphorus and take your military ship there. Now, this gives countries which are in this region a much bigger power compared to NATO's allies. And this is what we want to counter. So what have I brought to you today, Mr. Speaker? First of all, I have told you that by introducing this motion, what we want is long-term political stability in this region that actually helps the sovereignty of the countries in this region. Because by using an active use of power, we are making sure that once the countries are negotiating terms, they're doing this on equal sides. And secondly, I have told you that by establishing these missile systems, it will create a balance of power, and this balance of power will ensure that the region suffers from long-term political stability. And secondly, NATO will ensure that by having this missile system in this specific region, NATO's interests are maintained and that NATO's allies are not taken advantage of. And for all these reasons, the government is proud to propose it.
Thank you, and I would like to invite from Cornell, the member of opposition, to respond to that extent.
Let's get back to facts. The side proposition which has clearly forgotten what the facts are for today's debate. First of all, I would like to begin by a few rebuttals. The rebuttals to begin with are that they don't understand that not whole Eastern Europe is NATO. They have repeatedly stated that Europe that these missiles will protect NATO's interests and not the interests of that particularly host country. And that is the most important point, ladies and gentlemen. We are doing colonization under their model. We are doing imperialization under their model. And this is what they're providing us here with. That's the first part. Secondly, it's not offense, but it's not defense, but offense. We have seen that previously, and that's also my extension, that what has happened when Americans and the NATO proposed that we are going to place a missile defense system in the Eastern Europe. And I will elaborate more further into that. And the third more important point is that if we believe in democracy, it is very likely that in Eastern Europe you could have an anti-Russian leader. You could have a pro-Russian leader. And if he's a pro-Russian leader, and if you have deployed your defense system in that pro-Russian country, what it could do is further threaten Europe, which Europe cannot afford to do so at this point. Please have a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are providing you is equality. What our model will provide you is equality. We believe in economic development of the country. We believe in economic investment within the country. We believe that the international powers like NATO, like US, Europe should do more economic investment in the country. Why? Because Ukraine, the crisis of the situation is that Ukraine and Europe are economically dependent upon Russia. And we need to make it an economically independent, viable country so that they could be at par with each other before they go on and have any kind of a diplomatic relationship.
At that point,
Please have a seat on that point. The idea what we need to understand is that what the current status quo is. In 2005 and 2006, it was already proposed by the Russians and the NATO that we are going to, by the US and the NATO, that we are going to impose and we are going to put this defense system up in the Eastern Europe. What was the result of that? Georgia, the parts of Georgia were taken away by Russia. Parts of Ukraine have been taken away today, now by Russia. What they consider defense, ladies and gentlemen, Putin considers that to be an attack on national sovereignty. We need to understand that Putin is in a very sensitive state of mind. He lost Soviet Union. And if any further development that he would consider that would threaten the integrity of Russia at this point of time, he would take any measures whatsoever to expand the Russian empire at any cost, and may it be at the cost of invasion or at any diplomatic compromises. Please.
do you think economic investment in Ukraine would have stifled political dissent against the leaders, which, according to you, sparked this conflict?
Ladies and gentlemen, economic development is the only key. It has been proven throughout the world. Economic development could only give independence to these dependent countries. Now, moving on to my second point, I've talked to you about how Russia has invaded Georgia and Crimea already because of the fact that it considers to be threatened by the NATO's defense system, which they call defense, which is actually offense. The second idea is that Russia has already increased the price of gas that it supplies to Ukraine. Ukraine is dependent when it comes to fuel and energy on Russia. Europe is dependent when it comes to gas, energy, and fuel on Russia. When you are going to stop, when you are going to take those offensive actions, not defensive, offensive actions against the Russian establishment, what you are going to do is you're going to motivate Russians to cut off the gas supply of the whole Europe. And Europe works on gas, ladies and gentlemen. In this economic recession, when Germany's production is the only source of economic development for the Europe, you cannot take that risk.
That point, sir.
Yes,
It's
please.
perfectly fine for Russia to grab a few countries in exchange for gas provision to the rest of Europe.
Ladies and gentlemen, the crisis of the situation is, the tragedy of the situation is, we have tried their model. We have tried their model. We have tried the fact that how the NATO and the US proposed previously that we are going to deploy this defense, nuclear defense. Please have a seat. They are going to apply these defense missiles within the Eastern Europe. We have tried their method. It hasn't worked. Russia became threatened, Russia became more concerned, and as a result of that, went on to the expansionist agenda that Putin has in mind, and you are giving him more reasons to do so and pursue it, because he wants to protect Mother Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to my last point. No, please. Moving on to my last point, hazards of weaponization. Ladies and gentlemen, we have two hands. You give me two hands, we will continue to clap. You continue to weaponize two people, they will continue to fight. This is not the solution not the solution. This is what is precisely happening in Syria. The example lies, for instance, in Lebanon, where Rafiq Hariri's visionary leadership made sure that there was no foreign intervention, there was no more proxy wars. He made sure that there was no more foreign weaponization of the region. And as a result of that, Lebanon was forced to come and make a treaty, and we have Shias, Sunnis, and Christians living in the country, and it has turned out to be one of the most safest countries in the current Arab world. This is what visionary leadership does, ladies and gentlemen, because he made sure that the weaponization was stopped of the country. Because this is what would happen if you will continue to provide weapons. Weapons are not for defense. You do not peel oranges with nails. You scratch at each other with nails. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the idea which the side proposition has completely missed. Now, summarizing the whole idea. What they stand for, defense, is an offense. Putin considers that to be an offense. They have tried it previously. Russia has gone on to grab lands of Georgia and Ukraine. And what they are supporting is, they are basically asking Russia to go on to do such actions. So the whole argument is flawed. Secondly, there are economic repercussions, which Europe cannot afford to have in this economic recession. They would be deprived of gas, they would be deprived of economic resources, they would be deprived of crude resources. And we cannot afford to do that, especially in this era of economic recession. Thirdly, which was discussed down the whole table, the hazards of militarization. We have seen in the past that militarization does not lead to peace. It leads to war, and we do not support war. They stand for perhaps a World War III, and we do not want to take this war to the next step. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore we are proud to oppose.
And one last time from the government for CMU, Valerie, to offer the analysis for debate.
On our side of the bench, we believe that no, we don't just like say, okay, bigger countries, you could just go over our borders, you could just do whatever you want, and we won't do anything about it. But on their side of the bench, they're saying that is okay, that is fine, because we can solve it through diplomacy and sanctions. But what our side government has already said is that that is no longer available. That is not an option. You know why? Because countries have already stepped in. They've already infringed the right of sovereignty. But before I go on to my substantive, I have identified 3 clash points in this debate. The first clash point is the need to invade. The second is the consequences of debate, because two sides of the party have different opinions on this. And third of all, our proof of why this is imperative and why this is effective. But first off, they said that there's no need to, because there's diplomacy. But did Russia really put everything they had into diplomacy when they rolled in their tanks to Crimea? No, they did not, Mr. Speaker. They did not. That was not diplomacy in any form of levels. That was an infringement of sovereignty, and they did not take any consideration of diplomacy. Diplomacy is a two-sided coin. It requires two sides of the party, and if another party just rolls in their tank, that is not diplomacy, Mr. Speaker. That is infringement. But basically, Russia is this large, influential country. So Ukraine can't really do anything about it because they lack the resources to do so. The EU can't do anything about it because most of their gas supplies is supplied by by Russians. 54% of Germany's gas supplies is supplied by Russia. They can't do anything about it. So the only hope that Ukrainians really have is NATO, a multilateral body that's made up of different perspectives, in order to make sure that their rights is being given. Sit down, please. But by not doing anything, by just letting their tanks roll in, we're saying that Russia is above the rule of exception of sovereignty. They are above this. They could do whatever they want because they're big and powerful. That no one is going to stop them. Russia is part of the Security Council. It has economic ties with so many countries. No one country will do something about it. But multi countries might be able to do something about it. They said that this isn't the Cold War. That we shouldn't act upon proxy wars anymore. But Mr. Speaker, this isn't the 1800s as well. People can't just call manifest destiny on many other countries. They should earn that right. Sit down, sir. Second of all, they said, how about sanctions? But Russia has already sanctioned Ukraine, and they will also sanction the EU if the EU doesn't do anything about it. And as you can see, the EU has an important role to play in this because they're right next door to where it's happening, but they can't do anything about it. So the only choice that they actually have is the NATO. So let's not forget that Ukraine actually wants to become part of the EU. We are not only protecting the sovereignty of the people, but we are also protecting the mere interest of local citizens that are involved in here. We are advocating for the people on the ground, not just the higher levels of countries. We want them to trade not just with Russia, but to all the other EU countries. We want them to have better standard of living. So we are holding this higher than just the national interests of Russia. Yes, I'll take
so
it.
So you think that if the other EU countries install missile defense systems towards Russia, Russia will feel more obliged to trade with them?
Yes, that would move into my third point, which is about stabilization. So yes, moving on to my third point, which is the second point, which is the consequences of this action. Side opposition here said that it has adverse international relations, that it will destabilize the whole region. But no, Mr. Speaker, we believe that it actually will stabilize the region, because then NATO is right there to make sure that the big countries such as Russia will just not walk in and do what they please. We are like a bigger body is making sure that things run smoothly. What Ukraine needs right now is stabilization, and decades of that. They need to find their identity, and they need to grow relationships with other countries. They need to find out who they are, and this is not going to happen if Russia is looming over their backyard and telling them what to do and what not to do. And yes, they said that they could just cut off supplies, and yes, they have done that, but no one did anything about it because they can't. As I said, EU can't do anything about it, Ukraine can't do anything about it. So, yes, opening, I'll take you.
Okay, so I like the history lesson about Russia and how we have to do something about it, but you forgot about your proposal that the effectiveness and the...
Oh, which moves on to my third point. This is beautiful. All the BOIs are asking about my flow of my debate. Okay, why is it imperative? Okay, there's already instability within the regions. People have already walked into different borders and infringed sovereignty. Things are already happening. If we don't do anything about it now, when else are we going to do something about it? As you can see, policy of appeasement does not work in Europe. We have seen this in World War I, where Germany first took over Austria, then Poland. When are we going to learn that the policy of appeasement does not work? Sit down, please. That we're just going to let other countries infringe on other people's sovereignty, where Russia is just making arbitrary decisions on what is theirs and what is not. We need a bigger body in order to govern these decisions, and we believe that this is effective because, as my partner Zuhair has said, that all the NATO comprises of different bodies, and they have the resources and the time and the party and the resources and the relationships that other countries wouldn't have if they were just by themselves. So what have I brought you today, Mr. Speaker? I have brought you that the need of this is crucial. There is no longer diplomacy does not work, because clearly, if diplomacy clearly worked, no one's going to roll their tanks in other places. That sanctions doesn't work either, because Russia is too big of a powerful country in order to impose that. And third of all, the consequences, that it will actually stabilize the region rather than destabilize it. And we believe that this is an important matter, and that is why we are proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
And to conclude the debate, the whip speaker for the opposition from Cornell.
They say it is not aggression, but they would weaponize. They say that we want to protect the interests of a country and prevent war, but they would invade a country. They would mark this country as one that requires military intervention, because diplomacy obviously does not work. Because what we want in this situation is a Cold War situation of mutually assured destruction, which they have not proven is beneficial, because that is the best way to ensure that countries work together. They think that forcing ties between countries through militarization does create meaningful ties. They think that India and Pakistan are truly friends because they've achieved social understanding and not because they have weapons on either side of the table. What we bring to you today, ladies and gentlemen, is firstly, 3 clash points. Number 1, is weaponization of Eastern Europe a good way of achieving what you want to achieve? And what message does that send? Number 2, what is the answer to Eastern European stability? And number 3, what are the economic and political ramifications of physically installing a military defense unit inside another country by an intrinsic force which is more powerful than that country? So first, is weaponization a good idea? They said yes, weaponization is a good idea because it's defense. And on its basic premise, defense is good. Now they're making a lot of implicit assumptions here about defense. First and foremost, that the countries who do have this defense will appropriately use this defense for just cause. And we start on the side of that is not necessarily true. That we do not expect that an imported form of NATO defense is going to take to a country perfectly such that it will enact that defense when it sees fit, and that will always be correct. No, thank you. More importantly, we think it sends a very bad message it sends an abhorrent message of diplomacy, actually, ladies and gentlemen, because it says that you don't have to talk to those people. If those people are aggressors towards you, you be aggressors towards them. They've made no argument that differentiates themselves from Will Lapierre of the NSA, who says that the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely ludicrous. We say, secondly, as a second point of contention, that the answer to stability here is not giving them defense from the outside. Why? Well, firstly, they say that the missile defense will be installed in NATO, and then someone else it will be installed in the country. Clearly, they don't know where it's going to be installed, which is already problematic. No, thank you. But more importantly, who decides when the missile defense is used? Does NATO decide, or does the country itself decide? Because if NATO decides, then you are beholden towards NATO, and you require NATO to define your nationalism and your principles and your agenda when you do want to wage war against somebody else. And we don't think that that does necessarily represent a country's true will, as pointed out on our side of the house in the case of Turkey when they protested against missile defense systems. Yes?
Wouldn't it at least be consensual rather than tanks rolling into your country? Being part of NATO is at least consensual rather than other countries rolling into your.
You are hoping that a consensual agreement will be achieved quickly before tanks roll into the country. And by the way, tanks never rolled into Ukraine. It was taken over by your opening set by unmarked soldiers who were supposed to be found by the missile defense system, who were unmarked anyway, so how are they supposed to be found? Also, there were no tanks and there was no military intervention in Ukraine. So your argument falls upon itself. Now, moreover, let's talk about this idea of diplomacy and why we proved our point on the side of the house. Because they said that economic sanctions don't work. Okay, sure, we'll give you that. Economic sanctions might not be the best thing. But the crisis in Crimea happened 3 weeks ago. So how do you know that economic sanctions are not going to work categorically yet? In fact, you said so yourself that Russia is so dependent on economic ties. It's so different from the World War II scenario that you posited that Russia has no choice but to be beholden to international trade. And if that international trade freezes up, Russia freezes up. Russia cannot afford to forego 50% of its oil trade towards the EU because you think that the EU can afford to send missile defense systems to smaller countries to hit Russia back. That doesn't work, ladies and gentlemen. More importantly, the third point of clash we're talking about here are what are the economic and political ramifications of physically installing a missile defense system in a country? Well, firstly, we think it's bad for trade. Because we think that countries that do consign to the EU, putting missile defense systems in their country, forego potential trade with less aggressive countries. Countries that would have otherwise traded with them because they see these people as potential aggressors. They see these people as ready to play for offense, not ready to be defensive, conservative, diplomatic people. More importantly, in the context of this debate, the examples of India and Pakistan show that there was no true diplomacy, that even if you do have defense against different countries, you don't actually foster proper economic development, you don't actually foster a proper want for you to appreciate another person's perspective, or to be economically involved with that other country. And we don't think that that's very beneficial. More importantly, we think that there's an issue of accountability here. Because when things go wrong, who do you blame? Do you blame NATO? Do you blame the small country? When the small country misfires a missile because the bigger country was flying a helicopter over their airspace and a civil war starts, or even a war between the two countries starts? Who is accountable for that? And can NATO afford to wage wars? In fact, even if your system works out well, can NATO afford to put a missile defense system in every smaller country that is being bullied by a bigger country, because the best way to solve the problem of all small countries in the world is to militarize them? What is your response to that, ladies and gentlemen? They have provided no sufficient response to that. I'll take opening.
We are talking about defense. Defense is an option. You have to take necessary measures to be defensive. You can't just sit there and hope that the other country will attack, and that is what Ukraine did, and see their fate.
Thank you. But as my teammate said, the problem is that you perceive it as defense. The country for whom you are defending against perceives it as offense. There is no doubt that you militarizing a country, whether you want to call it a missile defense system, whether it's just soldiers or tanks or unmarked idiots jumping the border, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, your missile defense system is viewed as an offense, it's viewed as a militarization, and it's viewed most damagingly in the context that is endorsed by the EU. And that is what is so harming to your model on this side of the house. What have we brought to you today, ladies and gentlemen? We've said first and foremost that we think that it is the fundamental right of a country to realize its own economic potential, and that there are difficulties in being overridden by other countries, but that those difficulties are not achieved through militarization. They are achieved through economic ties. They are achieved through having other people collaborate with you, and they are achieved through diplomacy. We do not think that NATO does fully represent the will of Eastern European countries, and that if they do try to militarize the region, they will do so for their own interests, and we think that those conflicts of interest do not serve to benefit the smaller Eastern European countries. And we also think, finally, that diplomacy is principally and practically the best thing to do. What they've showed us now is that a crisis that has happened 3 weeks ago is not eligible for diplomacy. We should in fact start bombing Russia right now. We should have a military defense system right now, because that's the best way. We think that's an abhorrent model, and for all these reasons we oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this debate. You may cross the floor, shake hands, and then go wait in the briefing venue. Go have snacks first. Drink some tea or coffee. We'll announce the results in a while.
In the